This is intended for mature audiences only, so please use discretion when listening. Welcome to Call to Dispatch, the show where we hear real stories from the people who answer the call. My name is Dave. Now, most people will never step foot inside a prison. Even fewer will understand what it means to provide care there. Today's guest does both. She's been a nurse since 2009 and a correctional nurse since 2018, serving in New Jersey's men's prisons, women's prisons, minimum security units, and maximum security facilities, where every decision can shift the balance between safety and danger. She's worked the floors, led departments, and even took on the critical role of infection control nurse. In this episode, she takes us behind the gates and into one of the most misunderstood corners of healthcare. This is correctional nursing, raw, real, and rarely seen. Today's guest is Veronica. Veronica, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you here. So, as tradition, okay, before we get into the show, I just want to take a moment to just raise a toast to you, okay? I understand that the work that you do is critical and not everybody understands the dangers that you face on a daily basis. Part of the reason why we're doing the show today. So I just want to take this opportunity to just raise a toast to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Right. So let's get into it. When you were a child, what did you want to do when you grew up?
So, I did not want to be a nurse. I didn't even think about being a nurse. I actually wanted to be a marine biologist.
Oh, wow.
I grew up in Southern California, so I love the ocean. And I decided at a very young age if I couldn't be a mermaid, because that's what I ultimately wanted to be, I figured I would at least work in the ocean. So I wanted to be a marine biologist.
Okay. So from going to wanting to be a marine biologist to then sort of getting into nursing, how did that happen?
So I decided I wanted to be a nurse actually when I was a teenager. I was a young mother, and I remember the way the nurses had made me felt. I remember sitting in the hospital. It was 2005, and I was so young and so vulnerable. And I remember thinking, I want to do that one day. The kindness that the nurses showed me really shaped who I am as a nurse today. So that's really when I decided I wanted to be a nurse. Was in
Okay.
2005.
Oh, nice, nice. Okay. So before the correctional healthcare that you're doing currently,
Mhm.
what did you imagine working inside of a prison would be like? And does that does those thoughts or imagination does that sort of ring true to the reality of it?
Yeah, so sort of. I didn't expect like how much of like a clinic that the correctional setting is. It's very it resembles a clinic. I didn't realize that they offered so many different medical aspects like available for the patient. So, for example, everybody thinks it's just med lines and maybe some doctor visits here and there, but we do a lot more. We have optometry, we have dental. For the females, we have GYN. We have X-rays on site. We have ultrasounds on site. We do, phlebotomy. We do all those things. So that was definitely not something that I expected. So that was cool to learn.
Okay, so from transitioning from sort of general nursing into correctional nursing, what prompted you to pivot in that way?
So I actually got hired in corrections by accident. I It was a well-known company in our state, and I had my resume on one of those job finder websites. I believe it was one of them, and the company reached out to me. They said, we saw your resume, and they said, we have a position that we think that you'd be good in. It's primarily adult population. It's very clinic style. And they explained like the role, but they left out the fact that it was in a prison.
Okay.
So I talked to them. They said the benefits are great, the hours are good, the pay is, comparable. So I went through this whole phone conversation listening to them describe this job. And I thought, yeah, this is great. So then they asked me, would you be interested in moving forward with an in person interview? I said, yes. And when they said, you're going to be going to, this correctional state prison or whatever, that's when my jaw dropped because I was not expecting prison. Um, and I think I must have said something like, wait, what? Because they confirmed, like, "Do you still wanna come in?" I
Mm.
said, "Yes, I do." So that's how I got into the door, of corrections, and once I started working, I absolutely loved it.
When you um, sort of made the decision to go into the correctional side of things, did any of your family or loved ones have any reservations about you going into that type of environment?
Yes, actually, my family hated it, and I
Okay.
still think they are not huge fans of it. But they were so worried about the environment. They thought, it's dark, it's negative, and I can't tell you how many times they're like, why don't you just want to go get a regular job in a hospital? And like, honestly, like, sometimes that can be offensive. Like, why are you saying it's not a regular job? Like, it is a specialty and it should be acknowledged as a specialty. Just because it's not in a hospital doesn't mean that it's not a real nursing job. We have real patients and we see real things. It is a real job.
Mm.
Um, I was married at the time when I started in corrections. My husband was a police officer and he was the only one who was totally supportive of it because he knows from taking, you know, they don't call them patients, but people that he arrested to jail, and going to see the nurse. So he was aware of the environment, on the jail aspect. And the first thing he said was, "Oh my gosh, it's a great opportunity. You're going to be so safe. You'll love it. You should work there." So he was very supportive of it.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So, what sorts of things were people saying to try and dissuade you from taking that job?
They weren't saying anything to really persuade me, just making comments like, when I would tell a story about something that happened at work, they would be like, "Oh, that's awful. Like you like that?" But then I can tell an even worse story from
Mm.
working in the emergency room and they're like, "Wow, like it's really commendable what you're doing." What's the difference? It's the
Mm.
same thing. So it's just like the way that people react to my stories, as opposed to the way they would react when I tell them about stories in the emergency room. It's just a little bit of a different vibe.
I think what it is, I mean, me sort of speaking from my own personal thoughts is I feel it's because it's that word prison. It carries
Mhm.
so many negative connotations that, you can have an identical story from a regular hospital versus a prison, and the reaction to the prison one is going to be more negative.
Right. Right. Which isn't fair. I mean, we could have a patient in the emergency room that is also an incarcerated individual and it would be the same exact story, just a different setting.
Exactly. It's the same job, just a different building.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, what are the biggest misconceptions that people tend to have about healthcare workers inside the correctional facilities?
Definitely, I think the biggest misconception is that correctional nurses aren't real nurses. And we are real. We all took the same exact courses in school, and we all sat for the same NCLEX Board of Nursing exam. Um, I think that's the biggest one. I've heard people have said it to me, like, "Oh, you just work here because you couldn't get a job somewhere else,"
Oh wow.
or you're not a real nurse. I want to go to the hospital and see a real nurse," which is funny because for the longest time I was working both in the prison and in the hospital, and I'd have patients even say, like, "You're not a real nurse. I wanna go to the hospital." And in my head, I'm like, "You would see me there too." Like, it's the same person. The difference between us in a hospital's, nursing, is that we just honestly, like, we wear different specialty hats. So in a hospital, everyone has their specialty and we all work together collaboratively, which is great. But in corrections, the nursing staff, we are the med surg nurse. We are the trauma nurse. We are the code team. We are the, lab techs. We are the ones who start all the IVs. We do it all.
Mm,
There isn't any, specialty unit that the patients can go to or somebody that we can call. It's us. We do all of it. And we perform a lot of the same duties, but just with limited equipment and supplies and space.
yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that we do as much that we do in the prison setting.
Do you remember your first day walking into a prison as a corrections nurse? What struck you most?
So honestly, like two things. I remember being scared of the metal detectors and like the pat downs. Um, so even us as staff, we do have to go through the metal detectors and like the security checks every single shift. Actually, anytime you leave a security area, you have to go through it. If you leave and then come back the same day, you still have to go through it. And I was so scared, like, what if I beep? What if there's something on me I don't realize? So I was definitely scared of that. It was like more tense than like international TSA checks. um, I don't know why. It was so scary. There's like a line of people behind me, like cops and nurses and people. And I just thought, like, oh my gosh, what if I don't make it? But that was fine. And then I also remember my first interaction with a patient, and it was very like, I don't really know how to say this. It was like you see people on the news, you see people on TV, you see people on documentaries, you see
Mm,
people on Netflix shows and Hulu documentaries, and you see the people on the news. Of course, we're in a state, so anything that's on the news in our state, if they get arrested, they're coming to us.
yeah.
And, seeing them face to face was such a strange feeling. Like, it was weird. I don't wanna say starstruck because I wasn't starstruck, but it was that same feeling like, "Oh my gosh, it's a real person." It's
Yeah.
like, these are real people right in front of me. And then just how normal, we hear in the news, like, "They're horrible. They did this. They did that." And then they're standing right in front of you, and it's just like a vulnerable, normal human being.
Do you know what? It I hear you say that, and I completely understand the concept of the starstruck,
Mhm.
because it's like you see and you hear on the news, and it's kind of removed from reality in that way. But then when you're confronted by that very thing, that very person face to face, it's yeah, it's a new level of it's like the what you thought was, you know, removed from your reality is suddenly there. So I completely get the starstruck concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um. So how does providing care behind bars differ from working in a hospital on the outside?
Oh my gosh, it's so different. Um, Mostly because of the security aspect of it and the equipment aspect of it. So, normal things that we keep on us all the time in the hospital, we can't have in prison. So, for example, your scissors. You can't have scissors on you. Um, your Apple Watch for any type of communication, documentation, taking quick notes, you can't have that. Um, so things like that, and then the security, obviously. So, like, nobody moves, no patients, no inmates can move around the compound without appointments. So they have to be scheduled. Even if like, oh, I remember somebody, they needed to have a dressing change every morning. I forgot to schedule them. It's a process of calling custody and saying, hey, I know they don't have an appointment, but can we bring them down? We need to see them. Making sure that there's time for that patient to come in because they can only hold a certain amount of inmates in the clinic at a specific time for security purposes.
Mm.
And I have had custody say, like, they can't come right now. There's too much going on and we have too many inmates here. It'll be a problem. Or can you reschedule them for tomorrow? So you have like those kind of constraints. So trying to work with that. Whereas in the hospital, if you ask for something, it's going to be there within the next 5 minutes. It's utmost priority.
Yeah. Would you say then To me, it sounds as if it's harder working in the corrections unit. Is that accurate?
I don't know if it's harder as much as it is different. You just learn to adapt. Um, it's definitely different. You just learn a different set of skills. I remember when I went from corrections to the emergency room, it felt like luxury. I was like, oh, I have so much stuff here. You want to know what I miss the most out of the biggest difference between hospital and corrections?
Hmm.
I miss my coffee. I miss not having access to like Starbucks at any given time. I can just go on my phone, order my Starbucks, and
Yeah,
it's ready via mobile order in 10 minutes. I miss not having DoorDash. We used to DoorDash stuff all the time.
yeah.
That I think that's what I miss the most. If you give me a cup of coffee, I'm good.
How was making that adjustment from going from basically using your phone at any point in time that you feel like doing so to walking in and having to lock it away and almost feeling as if you're removed from the rest of the world?
So I see so many nurses and I hear so many nurses freak out about that. They say, like, I couldn't do it. I could never do it. So, a couple things. One, let's address the obvious. What if your kids want to get in touch with you? How do you get in touch with your family? There is a phone number and they can always call. If there is an emergency, I've been working in corrections since my kids were very young and they know how to get a hold of me if there is an emergency. And that's something that within the prison, every prison I've worked in, they take that very seriously. If a child calls and is looking for their parent, we will make sure that that parent is notified immediately.
Yeah,
Um, Now, as far as everything else, social media, all that stuff, honestly, you've seen my content, you've seen my page, you've seen my,
yeah,
TikToks and everything. I'm on social media all the time.
yeah.
It is so refreshing to unplug and just be off the internet for 8 to 16 hours. I actually love it.
Mhm.
Um, and it makes me feel less guilty on my days off when I do spend time on my phone or after work when I do spend an hour or two, scrolling around on Instagram. I feel less guilty because I haven't done that all day. Um, I personally think it's absolutely refreshing. I definitely find that my social group has narrowed a lot, and um, not because I'm, like, not on social media, but when I get out to my car, I have so many text messages on my
Mm,
phone that I've actually just kinda stopped reading a lot of them and just going to, like, the important ones, my kids, my parents, and really that's kind of it, and, like,
yeah,
a handful of friends. And you know how the phone works. So then when you don't answer a message, it kind of gets pushed down and pushed down and pushed down. And I'll get people who'll be like, hey, I texted you like 2 weeks ago. I'm like, I'm so sorry I didn't get to it. And that's because after spending 8 hours locked up, when I get out, I just want to see what's going on with my kids, go home and
mm,
just kind of unwind.
yeah.
So I kind of forget to respond to people's texts. So it's definitely changed a lot of my social dynamics for sure, but in a good way.
So I'm guessing then you've lost some friends along the way.
Um, I don't know if I've lost them. I just don't keep in touch with them. We're not as close. I know if I were to text them, they'd say, "Hey, what's up?"
Yeah,
But I don't know. I just kind of unplugged. It's a great way to really unplug for hours and hours. And when I work 5 days in a row, sometimes 6 days in a row, you really are just disconnecting. I have no idea what's going on. They're all hanging out, or they're catching up on this app or that app. And I don't see it.
yeah.
And it's okay. It's actually okay.
100%. I agree. Now, as you have alluded to, I have sort of seen your material on social media. I've seen your TikTok and your YouTube. And one of the stories or one of the videos that I sort of seen of yours on there, your YouTube channel, was you had stated how your relationship with custody will make or break your career in prison. Are you able to expand on that? How does custody play such a pivotal role?
Yeah, so 100%. Our correctional officers are the backbone of corrections. At the end of the day, it's their house.
Hmm.
So, and we're just guests in it. That's kind of how we view it, especially in our state. We just kind of really we train all the new nurses. We're guests. It's their house. They call the shots. They make all the movements. They ensure a safe and smooth operation. So without them, we are not able to do our job. So, with that being said, it is crucial to respect their rules, the policies, and to communicate really clearly. Um, they have reasons for all of their rules and all of their policies. And even if we don't know all of the reasons, we have to trust that ultimately it's for the safety and well being of us, as nurses,
Yeah.
and the incarcerated people as well. It's really important. So, you don't want to get snippy with somebody, especially when you're coming in and maybe they say like, "Oh, you can't wear that jacket today." Like, "Well, why? Every other officer lets me." We're not going to give an attitude. They have reasons. They have policies and we need to obey them even if it doesn't make sense to us. That's something that we do have to respect. Because that same officer could be the clinic officer the next day,
Mm.
and if I'm asking to get a patient up, and they could just say like, "No, I'm not going to. You gave me an attitude yesterday. Now I don't want to help you out." So it's good. They run the show. So it's just good to
Have
keep it
you ever?
keep the peace.
I agree 100%. It just makes the environment easier to work in. Have you ever seen like a colleague fall foul of like their rules and regulations in any way?
um, yes, we have, and we tell them obviously if we see something, we're going to say something. That's the most important. Definitely going to say something if we see something, and we have told people, don't do this or don't do that. If they continue to do it, they're going to get fired. They're going to get banned from the facility, and they're going to get fired. And I've seen that happen several times, actually. Lots of different things. Don't drive your car in a certain spot. Don't print certain things. Don't do certain things. If you keep doing these things, you're going to get fired, and they
Mm.
do. So.
Wow, fair enough. Right, so let's get into the work that you actually do in the prisons then. So you've worked between men and women's prisons, maximum, minimum security. Let's start with the men's prisons. What are some of the unique challenges that you faced working in a men's facility?
So the men are funny. um, they either, I feel like they're like two total opposites. They either avoid medical until it's very late
Mhm.
and it's more difficult to treat their needs. Like they'll say, like, "Oh, I was hoping," because I'll see patients and I'll be like, "Why did you wait this long to get this seen?" And they'll be like, "I was hoping it would go away on my own." Or they're total hypochondriacs and they'll get a paper cut and they'll think like, "Oh, I need to go to the hospital. I need an IV. I need antibiotics." I'm like, "It's literally a paper cut. You're okay."
I'm one of those men.
It's better. That's easier to manage
Yeah,
than the person who lets things drag on. It's so much harder to treat it further along than it is just immediately.
yeah,
But for the most part, the men are more driven. They like to work. And they're extremely, extremely respectful and thankful for the medical staff.
yeah,
They know that we're there for them when they need us, and they don't typically abuse the medical system much. They use it for what it's used for. Also, like medical codes. On the flip side, the medical codes in the men's prison, they're typically much more serious, and they definitely involve significant trauma. So stabbings, burns, broken bones, things along those lines. So that's definitely different. That's different than the women's prison, in my personal experience.
okay, so speaking of the women's prison, how what is the atmosphere like in there?
So the women are completely emotionally driven. I would say like 80%, 85%, if not 90% of the codes in the women's prison, at least again, this is just my experience,
Mm.
are drama related. um, like for example, this is a true story. I had a patient, they said that they were having chest pain. I went to their unit to go see them, brought her into the clinic. It was taking her vitals and it was talking to her. And I was like, "What's like actually going on? Like her vitals are great, everything."
Mm.
She's like, I was like, "Why did you say you have chest pain?" And she literally told me, she's like, "Oh, I have a broken heart." And I was like, "What?"
What?
She's like, "Yeah, my girlfriend cheated on me, and now I'm upset and I'm mad and I have a broken heart, and that's why my chest hurts." So I was like, "Okay, so we're not dealing with a cardiac event. That's
Mm,
good." So we definitely see a lot of family structures within the female prison. Um, so like all the units, there'll be like a unit mom, grandma, auntie, cousins, not real. Like create this family within their unit, wives, girlfriends. You'll hear an inmate walking around the compound and be like, "Hi, grandma, I
mm,
miss you." That's not really her grandma, but that patient, grandma, has, created this, reputation for herself as just kind
mm,
of being like the grandma figure on the unit. Um, they're also very like educated, not necessarily like high school or college, but they reach out to their families a lot and
mm,
they inquire about their health, their diagnoses, their medications, so that when they come to us, they definitely like to test our knowledge.
mm.
Um, they and I don't mind that. I think it's great. I think that they should do their own research or have someone give them information. I think that's great. It encourages them to educate themselves, and it keeps us on top of our education as well. Um, a lot of times in the men's prison, we'll say, here, we're going to prescribe you this medication. And they'll be like, okay, cool, thanks. And they walk away. Whereas the female, they'll say, like, well, why? What is this for? Well, what are the
Mm.
side effects? Is there anything else that you can prescribe? Well, my mom told me about this medication. Why can't we try that one? And so it's a lot more of that.
Wow. Okay. That sounds as if it can be a little bit frustrating at times.
Um, Sometimes, but personally, I like the challenge. And I have no problem telling a patient, I'm not sure. Let me look into it and I can get back to you. Because
Yeah.
that gives me an opportunity to also educate myself.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not going to know every medication, every diagnosis, every side effect. I couldn't possibly know all that, but it gives me the opportunity to look into it, educate myself, and then get back to them. And then, now we're both learning a little bit of something. I think it's fun.
That's a very, very nice attitude to have because I know that there's a lot of people out there in your field and in any field really where the sort of questioning will sort of get to them as if they take it personally, like you're questioning their authority or their knowledge or their expertise. So to hear you like the challenge, you embrace the learning. It's just a very refreshing attitude to have.
Thank you.
Right, let's talk about maximum and minimum security because you've again worked in both environments. What's the biggest difference between nursing in minimum security versus maximum security?
So the biggest difference is, well, the obvious. The maximum requires a lot of gates and security checkpoints just to get in. And it's actually annoying sometimes. If you forget something in your car, you have to go through that whole process again to get back out and to get back in.
Yeah.
Um, if you forget that you have your Apple Watch on and it triggers the alarm, you've got to go all the way back to your car. You can't bring your Apple Watches in. So that's definitely the biggest difference, and it's annoying. I've forgotten my watch on my wrist far too many times. You'd think I would know by now. Um, when it's raining, when it's snowing, and you're standing at that gate and it's just pouring on you, and you're like, this stupid watch. Um, but the difference is really in the types of patients. So the minimum patients, they have more freedom.
Mm,
They can keep a lot of their medications on them, within their cell or where they're housed, which makes medication lines shorter, which is nice. So they have most of their medications that they need to take. We just keep, a few that we have to like physically administer to them. The minimum patients are also closer to, usually, typically, closer to their release dates. So they have more incentive to be on good behavior.
mm.
Whereas the maximum and the patients that are housed in lock, they don't really care about the consequences of their actions. So that can make for a more tense, like hostile environment that can really turn at any minute. So that's what I would say the big difference is between the minimum and the maximum. Is really the patients.
Yeah. Now this might sound like a stupid question, but To me, I don't think there's any such thing as a silly question. So,
I don't either.
would you? Is it fair to say then that the level of danger is more in a maximum security? Yes. For those hearing me ask that question, going, "Yeah, of course it is." I just want to ask: is that the case?
So that's a tricky question because our immediate answer is yes. But at the same time, because the inmates in a minimum security have more freedom, there is more of a chance of something really happening to me personally, or to really anybody, because they have more freedoms, they have more things on their persons that they're allowed to keep, and there's less security checkpoints. So we trust that they're not getting any contraband, that nobody's smuggling in anything for them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going on. um and on the flip side, and I'm going to be completely honest, in my career, I think 2 or 3 times we have had, at, I'm not going to say which facility it was, but I have seen, or I've been present when we had an escape. So we had 2 different times, 2 different people, and they escaped, and both of them were from the minimum. So again, that goes into, because the security is a lot different for them than it is in a maximum security. So is it more dangerous in a lock? Honestly, it's more controlled. It's a lot more controlled in the maximum and in the lock than it is, especially in the maximum. When you go into a lock units, the inmates aren't even allowed out of their cells unless they're handcuffed. So you have somebody who's handcuffed and somebody who has the freedom to walk around on the compound with no gates. Who's more dangerous? Right?
Yeah.
So that wasn't a silly question. It's actually a really good question.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope the listeners feel the same way. Um, so would you say then between the maximum and the minimum, the way that you treated patients or conducted yourself was slightly different? Was there any deviation in how you acted, or are you just the same regardless?
Personally, I'm the same regardless. It doesn't change. It changes maybe how I'm able to perform my job duties. Getting a blood pressure on a maximum security locked patient who is handcuffed behind their back is different than somebody who can just walk into the office and I can shut the door and talk to them privately one on one. So, I mean, there's those types of differences, but I'm not going to talk to the patient who walks into my office privately one on one any different than I would the patient in lock.
Fair enough. Can you share a moment when you felt the stakes were dramatically higher due to the security level, whether it's minimum or maximum?
So, yeah, actually, there was a time, and this was actually in the security in a locked unit. So again, like, where I felt that they should have, so it should have been a safe situation, but the situation got really weird. There was a patient, and he was in his cell, and he was complaining of an excruciating headache. And at first we're like, I mean, it's just a headache. What's going on? Like, why are they calling all of us down for this? We knew who the patient was, and he was very violent, very aggressive, had a history of attacking correctional officers. So we're obviously already going to be like on alert. So we went down with a group of us. There was like 3 nurses who went down, and we get to the unit. The officers all had their body cameras on. Our facilities use body cameras.
Yeah.
And so they had their body cameras on, and they said, "Oh, we need you to go into the cell to do a medical assessment." And I remember stopping and thinking, "You want me to go into the cell?" Because that's not typically how we conduct medical assessments, especially on someone who we know is aggressive and
Mhm.
hostile. So that immediately like triggered, like, wait a minute, like, what's going on right now? I repeated the question just to confirm I heard correctly. It was a lieutenant who was asking me, and he said yes. And I said, okay. Um, I remember this because I was wearing a brand new jacket, and it was like the second time. It was winter. It was like the second time I had worn it. And I
Mhm.
remember taking off my jacket and giving it to a coworker. I'm like, "Here, hold this. If anything happens, keep it." So I was able to just quickly it seemed like an eternity in my head, but it was probably like 10 seconds. But I was like trying to think of how I can approach this situation professionally and do what custody is requesting of me, but also not break policy and also not put myself in a situation that could be like what I was concerned about was like a hostage situation. I was like,
Yeah,
I don't want to go into the cell. Like I'm not comfortable with that. Um, so I positioned myself like half in the door, like the cell doorway, and halfway like in the room. Oh, and he couldn't turn the lights on, is what the patient was saying. They can't have the lights on because it hurt his headache even worse. So now we're in a dark cell. So the whole
mm,
situation was just a mess. And I positioned myself so I wasn't entirely into the cell. So if something were to happen, my coworkers could literally pull me out.
yeah,
And I literally just talked to the patient, asked a few questions, and I said, to the custody, I said, I can't do a proper assessment unless we take this patient out and bring them up to the clinic. So that was my way out. And then we got the patient out into the clinic and we did a proper assessment. And the patient actually had a huge, huge, huge knot on his head. Looks like either he had hit himself, fell and hit himself on something, or somebody hit him. I'm not sure what the situation was. I don't remember,
mm,
but it was clear like that's why you have a headache. We ended up sending him out to the hospital to get CT scan and everything. But yeah, that situation was scary. It was definitely a scary moment. A few of us remember that one.
yeah, yeah. That doesn't sound as if it was. I'm guessing that wasn't really the right thing for you to have been asked to do it in that way.
Right. It definitely I don't know custody policies, but I don't feel like that was correct. Um, it was scary. It definitely I think that was the only time that I felt like I was like potentially the situation could go sideways.
Yeah,
But it didn't.
thankfully it didn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, the large knot on his head sounds quite gruesome. But in your time there, what is the most gruesome injury that you've had to treat or even seen?
Oh, I hope the audience is okay with this, but I think the worst I've seen was there was a guy and he did not like his bunkie and he worked in the kitchen and I guess he had boiled some hot oil and somehow put it in some type of a container and brought it
Oh,
back to his bunk. Yeah. You know where this is going.
I know where this is going. Yeah.
Yeah. So he splashed and poured all this hot oil on his bunkie. Um what we saw was so horrific. He didn't make it. The bunkie died. He passed away.
Ah,
Yeah, I mean, we immediately called like we didn't even we just call 911. Like don't even we're not doing just call 911. That was probably the worst thing I've seen gruesome wise. But I think like one of the most like I want to say no, I don't want to say stressful, but it was like mentally I had started prison. This was in 2018. I think it was 2018. I was literally had just started working in the prison and we had 4 overdoses all at once. I guess they had all shared the same drug that they had smuggled in.
mhm.
4 overdoses all at once on the 3rd level of the tier. So we all had to like run up all these stairs, 3 floors to get to the patients. The patients were dragged out of their cells and into the skinny little walkway. I don't know if you've seen like TV shows where there's like tiers on a
Yeah.
in a prison. There's skinny little walkways with chain link fence on one side and a cement wall on the other.
Mhm.
We had 4 people laid out and we just started doing CPR. Like it got so messy. We were using Narcan left and right. We're trying to splash water on them to wake them up. The nurses are that was custody. Nurses are doing, CPR. We were using like, the rescue breaths, all the things. It was intense. That I think was the worst. Of the 4, 3 of them survived. Um, I think that was more intense than the burn, to be honest.
Yeah, that does sound pretty intense, especially when you're dealing with the fact that the number of people involved.
Right, right. Oh, the doctors were brought up there. The medics came up. It was intense.
Yeah. Obviously, I know the environment that you work in. You're going to see a lot of gruesome things, and for the sheer fact that you're working with people, you're going to see gruesome things. You're going to see, things that maybe aren't as gruesome. In your experience, what's the funniest or most unexpected incident that you've come across?
Oh my gosh. One of the funniest that sticks in my I still talk about this. We had a patient, and this just kind of goes into like the type of people that we work with. I had a patient who once requested a nurse call. And when he came, he said to me, and he was serious. He was very serious. And he said, I think I caught the anemia. I s- and
What?
like, it took me a moment. I had to like stop and think, like, what is going on? So I asked him, I was like, what do you mean you think you caught anemia? And he said, well, his bunkie had just seen the doctor and he was just diagnosed with it and he thinks he caught it. And I thought it was funny and cute at the same time because it really showed the need for patient teaching and
Yeah.
education within the incarcerated population and honestly with any population really. Like what seems like common knowledge to nurses, by the way, in case anybody's listening, anemia is not something that you can catch. It's like a blood disorder.
Mm.
So you can't catch it. Um, but he really thought he was catching it and he was so scared. And honestly, that just made me laugh. And I still laugh about that to this day, don't catch anemia.
I'm guessing you didn't laugh in his face though.
Oh no, I didn't. I did not laugh in his face. Um, I just explained to him that, I can't really divulge on your patient, your bunkie's medical. But I can guarantee you don't have it. I think we ended up doing blood work just to make him feel better.
Just for the benefit of our listeners who may not be familiar with the term bunkie, in the UK, that's what we refer to as cellmate, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Right.
Hmm.
So let's talk about the different sort of roles that you've had. I believe you've been staff nurse, infection control nurse, and also a manager. So
Correct.
if we start with the staff nurse role, what does the daily medical care look like in that role? And is there anything that the public would be shocked to learn about?
So again, I think I mentioned this earlier. We are much like a small community hospital within the prison. Um, as I said, we have medical and mental health staff. And, the nurses are the ones who schedule all the appointments for the patients. The doctors have their appointments. Mental health meets with people all day, every day of the week. Um, but we also have, like I said, we have dental, optometry, x ray, ultrasound, GYN, EKGs, labs. So there's a lot that's going on site that I think a lot of people don't realize. So when I say like we had a busy day, we had a busy day. It's more than just doing a med line in the morning and that's
Mm.
it. We're doing a lot more. We're drawing blood. We're doing EKGs. We're doing appointments. It's a lot. And on top of that, for the RNs especially, we do have a set of protocols that involve different things like I have a headache, or for the females, I have menstrual cramping, or, I think I pulled a muscle out in the yard. There's a bunch of different protocols that we can follow and we can prescribe medications for those protocols, which makes it kind of fun. It gives you a little bit of autonomy, and I enjoy that. So we do get to do that on the daily basis. That's 7 days a week. Patients can request an appointment. So,
That's good. Do you know what? I've listened to you sort of describe that, and the thing that struck me, and again, not to sound uneducated or ignorant, but I didn't realize that it's essentially a hospital unit within a prison. I kind of just had the impression it was two or three nurses on site, and that was it. But it's a complete. It's like a whole unit that's in there.
mhm. Yeah,
Wow.
we have nurses, RNs, and LPNs. We have med techs. We have doctors. We have APNs. We have MDs. We have specialty doctors, optometrists, dental hygienists. Yeah, we've got a lot of people going on.
Wow. Okay. Every day's a school day, as they say. Um, let's talk about your role with as an infection control nurse. So this is This is a role that's obviously critical in a confined environment. What does infection control look like in a facility where people live so closely together?
Right. So this is definitely a very important role. The infection control nurse in our state oversees all of like the basics, like the annual TB testing, X-rays, anything related to hepatitis and HIV. They also coordinate all of the annual tests, labs, medications, injections, doctor appointments that are required to treat all of these things. So, if we get a patient, they have hepatitis or HIV, we make sure that they have the medications that they need. We do the lab work to make sure the medications are working. We make sure that the doctors are seeing them every 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is that they wanted to see them. So the infection control does that. Our facility in our state, like we get new patients, new intakes from county because we're state. So we get them from county every 2 weeks. So there's never a shortage of work for the infection control nurse because not only is she managing or he and managing all of the current patients, current incarcerated population, every 2 weeks we're getting 10, 15 more, 10, 15 more, 10, 15 more. So they all have to be screened by the infection control nurse for all of these infectious diseases. A lot of times we get patients who haven't been treated or haven't seen medical in years, if not their entire life. So, these are all new diagnoses that we have to treat them. Um, and they're also responsible in our state, they're responsible for the annual COVID boosters, the flu vaccines, for not only all the incarcerated individuals, but for staff as well. So they make sure that we have access to all the flu vaccines, COVID boosters, TB testing. And then they also, on top of all of that, they do offer CPR classes to make sure that custody and medical are all up to date on their CPR every 2 years.
Okay, that's really good. Yeah, that's actually quite a lot more going on there than I would have imagined again. So again, as I said before, every day is a school day, and I'm learning a lot just listening to you, talk about your career. Um, let's talk about your step into management then. How did stepping into management change your relationship with staff, inmates, and the system itself?
So when it comes to the staff, I think that it helped a lot that I was a floor nurse first.
Mm,
I understand the daily routines, the assignments, the prison movement times, etc. So that made it easier for me to advocate for the nurses when situations arose.
mhm,
Um, it took a while for the inmates to realize that they could not make appointments with me anymore. A lot of times they'd see me and be like, "Oh, Nurse Daly, I need a nurse sick call appointment with you. I need to talk to you." And at that time I said, "I'm not currently seeing patients right now."
mm.
Um, and then they would ask why, and they'd ask why, and they'd be like, "Oh, she's the boss." Um, so that took them a little bit, but honestly, I think as long as we're always following policy procedures, sometimes our patients, you know, they do need a voice too. So when they go to the nurses and they would say, they need X, Y, and Z, those nurses could come to me and I was able to advocate for them, which was good because, well, good and bad, because then the patients realized, oh, talk to Nurse Daily, she can make things happen. Like,
Mm,
not necessarily, but I can at least advocate for you. Specifically, I'm thinking of a patient that had diabetes. They had a knee amputation or leg amputation above the knee, and she needed a prosthetic leg. So, we were able to advocate for that patient and make sure that they got their prosthetic leg. So that was really a good opportunity to be in a management position. I learned a lot as a department nurse manager. Primarily, I learned how much communication takes place between medical and custody on such a higher level that I didn't realize as a staff nurse.
mm,
Um, as previously stated, we can't do our job without custody. And the way we get approval is by asking. But even like the officers, they need approval from their supervisors too for certain things. So when it comes to decision making, it takes place at a management level for both departments.
Mm,
So that's really where the connection between what the patients need, the nurse is telling the manager, and the manager speaking with admin of custody about what the things that we need, whether it's a timing issue, a manpower issue, an ordering a product issue and getting it approved to come into the building. There's a lot more that I didn't realize was going on behind the scenes when I'm just working face to face with the patient and doing clinic appointments. I didn't realize how much it entailed behind the
mm.
scenes.
Wow. Wow. Now, you worked through the COVID pandemic, didn't you?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. So I believe that COVID hit prisons harder than almost any other environment. What what was it like working, when the pandemic first reached the facility that you were in at the time?
Yeah. So COVID was insane. Um, when I say I lived at the prison, I mean that. Like
Mm,
we all did. We would work 16 minimum, sometimes 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that was mostly because of staffing shortages. So if one nurse tested positive for COVID, they'd be quarantined at their house for 10 days. So all it takes is one person to be quarantined, and then now we're down a staff for 10 days, and the same thing was happening with custody. And on top of that, they were doing like tracking, so they would see like, oh, who have you been around? Were you around this person and this person? If you were, they need to test and they need to be quarantined for 4 days. So it really made our staffing situation crazy. It got to a point where we were just kind of making our own schedule. Like I'll stay 20 hours. We were like block scheduling ourselves so that there
mm,
was staff all around. Um, we had to test ourselves and our patients every single week. Every housing unit was quarantined, like to themselves. So they can walk around in their unit, but housing unit A, I'm making these up by the way, housing unit A couldn't be anywhere near housing unit B.
mm,
So our med lines were split up into housing units and they had to come out at different times. Their yard time was split up into, different times so that they weren't cross contaminating between unit A and unit B. um, we did everything that we could, to treat our patients, their symptoms. We made sure that their symptoms were managed, and everybody was closely monitored. I think only a handful of patients ended up having to actually transfer out and go like to the hospital.
mm.
Um, but everybody came back and it was okay. We definitely got blamed a lot for quote unquote bringing the pandemic into the jail or into the prison. The patients would blame us. And I mean, they have a point. We are the only ones coming in and out, right? So
Mm,
they did have a point. Um, but patients and media like would say that we were, it's us. We brought it to them because we were coming in and out. It was like on the news and stuff. Like it was frustrating. But we were definitely screened every single day before we entered into the prison. They would take our temperature. If it was above a certain degree, we weren't even allowed to go in. We
mm,
definitely tested all the time. Um, but for me personally, to ensure I wasn't spreading anything at all, I had my two kids at home, actually living with my parents for 3 months, because I didn't want to bring anything home to them. I didn't want anything at home being brought into the prison. I was just literally just kind of kept to myself for 3 months. My only interactions was with my colleagues
mm.
and really nobody else. Which made us a very, very close knit family during that time.
Yeah.
We got very close. And I know it was difficult for the inmates too, because they were not allowed to have visits the same way that they were used to. They had to do virtual visits, and that was stressful.
Yeah.
And that could play a lot on your psyche, not being able to see your family, especially in the female prison, if they have kids, like I get it. And that was something that I was able to tell them back at that time. Like, we'd have patients come up and they were like freaking out, they're upset. I haven't seen my kids in 2 months, and I was able to honestly say I understand because I
Yeah.
haven't seen mine either, and I get it. Like we're all in this together.
What moment during COVID will stay with you forever?
What moment would stay with me? Um It's not a bad moment, actually. It was the camaraderie that we had on the actual COVID unit,
Mm.
suiting up, putting on, the suits we had to put. We looked like we were going to space. And it was so hot and we were sweating. But me and one particular coworker, we would go down together because we have to get vitals on everybody. We had to do COVID testing on everybody. We were very limited on what we can bring on the unit. And then we had to bleach everything. We had to like wipe our feet on this special like scrub mat and then put booties on. Like it was this whole process. But we would go on the unit and okay, so when you're in prison, no matter where you're at, except for maybe the bathroom. You're on camera. You're always on camera. And we would suit up in our suits and we'd go to the COVID unit together. It was like a job that like we all hated to do, but we had to do it. And you could only open one cell at a time to get their vitals and then close it. And then we had to switch our garb and put everything else for the next patient and wipe everything down. It was a whole process. But we would dance. We would do our COVID dance in our outfits every time. And we would like look at the camera because we knew they were watching.
Yeah.
Um, and honestly, that's what sticks out the most is doing the COVID rounds on the unit in our space suits and doing our COVID dance.
Oh, that's a nice wholesome story. Um, in the entirety of your career, was there a time where you've had to treat somebody who has harmed others? And if so, how did you separate the crime from the care?
Yeah, so every day. I have seen some of the worst criminals who have done some of the worst things. I'm this is honestly, and I've actually written a blog about this. And I think I talk about it in my book as well. Whether or not nurses should look up inmates' crimes. I think that's a very subjective decision.
Mm,
And, there's pros and cons to both. I'm not going to get into all of that, but I am one of them that looks them up. Especially when we got patients on intakes, I kind of scroll around and see. We always like to look and see if there's anybody that we've seen in the news because, we see people, on the news. Instagram posts things like, oh, this person was arrested today or that. So we know eventually they're coming to us. So we just kind of scroll around. But in doing so and also, I'll get patients who are so nice. They're so sweet. I'm like, "This is a really nice person." Like, I could probably hang out with this person on the outside. This person seems so cool. Then I'm like, "Why are they here? Like, this doesn't make sense." And then you see what they've done, and it's mind-blowing. It's shocking. Um, so definitely every day I work with patients that, have done horrible things, but does it change the way that I treat them? Absolutely not.
yeah.
Nurses don't judge. Um, who someone is as a person doesn't change how we treat their symptoms. So it doesn't really matter if a person is a famous actress or, is a CEO of a large company, um, or if there's somebody who took several lives, they're a serial killer. That doesn't change how we treat their symptoms that they're presenting with when they're sitting right in front of us. um, and honestly, you could have those same exact patients in a hospital and you just don't realize it.
Mm,
Actually, we have no clue who our patients are in the hospital. They could be extremely dangerous and unmedicated and manic and violent. At least in the prison system, we know our patients, we know their history, and we know all about them. And honestly, you could use that to your advantage in a good way.
what's the most difficult part of being a nurse behind bars?
Balancing work and personal life is definitely, I think, a little tricky. Not in the way that you think. I literally And this is, me just sharing, like, a little bit of my vulnerable side. I literally had to go to therapy, several years ago, family therapy, and learn how to be softer with my kids. They're older now, and
Mm,
they have learned to open up with me about how they feel, but learning how to balance home and work, I think, my girls, they don't have the same restrictions as inmates, obviously, and I need to remember that sometimes. When I talk to them, I know at work I'm so like strict with policies and procedures. That's like the most important thing, like in corrections, is just following policies and procedures. And anything that's outside of that is like, we're not even entertaining it. And I think, bringing that home, not the policies and procedures, but when the kids would do something that they know they shouldn't do or whatever, I'd be like, just my reaction of like, absolutely not. We're shutting this down. Instead of talking to them, like, why did you do that? Like, let's talk about this. Obviously, whatever they're doing is for a reason in their head, whether it's right or wrong.
Mm.
They're making choices for their own reasons. And as a mother, let's talk about these reasons. Let's talk about why you're doing these things because it's probably not the best thing for you to do, but let's talk about it. And we can because, I'm your mom.
Yeah.
So that was definitely something that I had to kind of figure out pretty quickly. Um, Same with like, and I think this probably hurt my marriage. I mean, I'm divorced now, but even communicating with my husband, especially in arguments or anything, if any type of tone change, if I heard any type of tone change, I was very quick to say, we're going to stop this conversation right now. We're not going to have this conversation until you're ready to speak, like in a calm voice. And that sounds like a good response, but it really wasn't because he was taking that as you're talking to me like I'm an inmate. And, that would make him defensive. And it was really shutting down communication as opposed to encouraging communication. So that was definitely, I think, family, like learning how to manage my home life was definitely something that I learned.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that's a vulnerable sort of story to tell, so I appreciate you, you know, speaking on that.
Yeah, of course.
In your whole career, has there ever been a time where you genuinely feared for your safety or for a colleague's safety? Has there been a time where an inmate has directly threatened you or a colleague?
I've I've personally have never been threatened by an inmate. I've heard colleagues who have. But me personally, no. I think honestly, the only time that I actually generally felt unsafe was that moment when I had to go into the patient's cell and
Yeah,
assess them. I think that was the only time I've generally felt unsafe. Um, I've never felt unsafe in any other situation. Our custody is always right there. They're always right by our side. They're always either in the room or right outside of the room. We're never really alone. We're always on camera. Yeah, I think I genuinely, honestly feel safe for the most part.
good. That's good. How has the job changed the way you view the world outside of prison?
Um, I'm not sure if it's really changed how I view the world outside of prison. I think just understanding that really just not judging anybody and where they're at. There's a lot of untreated mental illness that's out
Mm.
there. I think it's a lot of compassion, a lot of humanity. I don't judge people. I don't take freedom for granted, that's for sure.
Mm.
I notice the small things like being able to go to the grocery store whenever I want or laying my head down on a nice fluffy pillow, eating food that, like, even if it's fast food, just any of that food, no buzzing gates. I can lay in my bed and it's quiet. I can
Yeah,
lay in silence. That's something that all like our incarcerated patients, they don't get that at all. It's never silent. It's never quiet. The radios are always chirping. There's always something going on. I'm definitely more aware of how many people on the outside, like I said, are walking around with untreated trauma, addiction, mental illness. And the ones that I have just happen to be, you know, arrested and charged. But
yeah,
there's a lot going on the outside that we just probably aren't aware of. And I'm definitely a little bit more mindful of that.
yeah. I completely resonate with that. Yeah, it's I suppose when you're in an environment where people's freedoms are restricted or completely removed, it's the little things that you notice more, isn't it? Like you said, the ability to just go where you want and when you want, and even something as minor as just sitting in silence.
Right, right, exactly. And you know what? I know a lot of people, and I've heard a lot of people say this either online or to my face, or on TV. I've heard so many people say like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe we're giving these criminals so much medical care for free. They're not paying for anything. And I have to pay this and I have to pay that. We have copays, we have, to pay health insurance. But like they're getting all these free things. Yeah, that's true. They are. They're not paying for any of this. But at what cost? Their freedom, because
Mm,
you can't put a price on that. Like, I would much rather pay my medical, co-pays and everything else every single month and, be able to sit in my backyard and watch the sunset and be able to raise my kids
yeah,
and, be able to be home with the family. Next week is Thanksgiving. We're able to be home with our families and enjoy the holidays and decorate a Christmas tree. So, you know what? Let them have their free medication. That's fine. Let them
yeah,
have their free dental care. That's okay. Because at the end of the day, you can't put a price on our freedom.
100%. I agree with that. 100%. So we've reached the final part of the show where I like to ask what is known as the legacy question.
I like
So
that.
your legacy question, okay, is I say your legacy questions. I ask everyone the same thing. So it's the legacy question. So if you could leave one piece of advice or a lesson from your time in service that you would want every listener to carry with them, what would it be?
I would say don't lose your positivity or your kindness. In a place that's designed to harden you, your softness can become a skill. I think being a light in the lives of patients that you care for, even in like a prison environment, their worst day is just another work day for us, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be treated casually. A genuine smile, a calm voice, a little kindness. It's not hard, and most of the time it shifts the energy instantly. And that's how you build rapport in corrections. Not by being a pushover or by being soft, like too soft. It's that steady, decent human being in an environment that doesn't always encourage it. I think that's literally that's what I would tell somebody who's starting in corrections.
You know what? That's a very, very good answer. And I sat there and I listened to what you were saying, and what came to mind was that is something, whether it's in corrections or even outside of corrections, it can be applied anywhere really. Because I don't know what it's like in America, because I'm over here in the UK, but society over here is a bit, I want to say, fractured. I'm not going to go on a rant as to society's broken, this, that, and the other, but I just find that there's a lot of people walking around just upset, angry,
Mhm.
and it feels very sort of fractured over here. And I feel like what you've just said can be applied to just people's everyday lives, because just a little bit of kindness can go a long way, because you never know what somebody is dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and you can either be that thing that sets them over the edge
Mhm.
in a bad way, or you can be that person who shows that little bit of kindness, and it can go a very, very long way with them. So that's a very good bit of advice.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you for joining me today, Veronica. It's been an absolutely eye-opening episode. I can honestly say that I have learned some things that I was ignorant to before. So I want to thank you for educating me and for educating the listeners as well. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
It's been an absolute pleasure. So before you go, for our listeners that want to follow your work or be entertained or even educated by you on social media, can you tell us where they can find you?
Yes, absolutely. So you can follow me on theprisionnurse.com. That's the prison nurse, not the prisoner, because I've had people say they couldn't find me. It's theprisionnurse.com. I'm also on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. All my links are on my website, though. The best place to find me is on my website.
Okay, so just to reiterate, that is theprisionnurse.com.
Correct.
Perfect. Veronica, thank you for joining me today. It's been an absolute wonderful episode, and I hope you've enjoyed your experience.
I have. Thank you so much.
Providing healthcare inside a prison isn't just a job, it's a daily act of courage. And today's conversation reminded us just how much strength, compassion, and resilience it takes to care for people in a place built to confine them. To Veronica, thank you for pulling back the curtain and sharing the reality of correctional nursing. From working across men and women's facilities to leading teams through the chaos of COVID, your story shows what it means to serve with both skill and heart, even when the world on the outside has no idea what you're up against. And to our listeners, remember this: behind every gate, behind every badge, and behind every uniform, there are people doing the unseen work. People carrying the weight of the system, fighting to make a difference where it's hardest to do so. If this episode opened your eyes, as it has done mine, or even shifted your perspective, please share it. These voices matter. These stories deserve space. Until next time, stay curious, keep listening, and honor those who serve by hearing their stories. This is Call to Dispatch. Thank you for listening.